My name's Holly Hendry. I'm an artist. I make sculpture, and I'm based in London in the UK.
And what's the title of the work that you've made for England's Creative Coast?
The title of the work is Invertebrate, and it's a three-part sculpture that's made from various conjoined materials.
Wow. And where will the work be displayed? Who are you working with?
So I'm working with the Warr Pavilion, and the work's going to be displayed right outside the Warr on the kind of grass area between the building and the sea. And the work kind of wraps itself through on the grass and then through the building itself. So it kind of extends your sight kind of under the ground in a way as well, or implies it's traveling through the spaces of the surrounding area as well.
You've given us quite a good description of what the first idea of what visitors will see, but can you say more about the motivation behind the work? What inspired it, and maybe something about the materials?
Yeah, sure. I've been spending, and I have been spending a lot of time in Bexhill and at the Warr Pavilion, and the kind of surrounding area really along the coastline. For me, I started to think about the things that were kind of appearing, reappearing, or kind of sinking around it. There's the wreck of the Amsterdam on Bulbhide Beach, and the beach itself kind of helps everybody understand these changing sea levels. And yeah, it felt like there was all these kind of untimely resurfacings and burials. And I was thinking a lot about the building itself of the Warr as something that stands like a kind of architectural cliff on the edge of the sea, kind of faced to the elements, and that location itself being on the edge of the land, looking out to, like, being on a border in a way, or looking out and being kind of aware of, it is an edge, is something that our country like lets certain people in and doesn't let certain people in. The kind of possibility of what edges can be, whether the kind of as a kind of gateway or a blockage in a sense. So I was thinking a lot about edges as this idea of breakdown and erosion, but also a barrier. And for me, this idea of the worm became a really important metaphor for that, as something that can bypass borders, infiltrate edges, and can signify like almost these wider ideas of kind of incorporation, erosion, symbiosis, or maybe like morphing contours or something. And I think even before that, I was really interested in the breakdown of edges through kind of ingestion or incorporation, eating, chewing, and what that does to like the outline of something, a kind of a tool to emulsify edges, or and what that offers in terms of reassembly. So the worm became this really important tool to think through all of these ideas through association with kind of undoing, redoing, and like, worms literally sink foundations or rocks through undermining and burying under them. So it's these kind of like little actions with big consequences, or big results. And
So I was just going to ask, was that a new area for you to be thinking about as a result of thinking about your ideas and the inspiration behind this particular commission? Or was this the worm I'm thinking of as a natural creature, a living form, but also something that has consequences in terms of its actions? Is that something you've been exploring in your work anyway?
No, not really. Worms have slowly crept into my work. I had been, maybe a year before doing this commission, I'd been making small metal worms out of just like bits of metal pipe and wrapping them into small works. But for me, this really came from the site and that edge, and being at the Bexhill Brickworks as well, and all of these ideas just like it kept coming back to the worm. It kept the worm kept reappearing, and the more I kind of thought about it, the more I learned, the more it made sense. Like, worms clean up our soil that we're polluting, and like, and so I guess these ideas are like things below the surface. Burial and submersion and incorporation were in my work before, but I think there's never been something so specific to kind of generate these ideas into a form that kind of addresses some of those things.
So the work is very much a kind of response, a site-specific response to Bexhill itself. And you just mentioned the Bexhill brickworks. Can you, I mean, I don't know if this was the first time you'd really been to the south coast or to Bexhill itself, but where else you went in your exploration. It's a seaside town, but there are lots of other things happening there. What were the different areas and places and people you met in Bexhill that inspired your ideas for the work?
I don't know if there's many places I haven't been in Bexhill now, because I spent a few days trying to kind of understand it in relation to how people use it and how people live there as well. And the work is a kind of very material response to the site, but a lot of the thinking behind that has come from seeing the surrounding area. So I walked along the beach a lot and spent a lot of time trying to understand the tides and the kind of activity around there. Like I mentioned, the wreck of the Amsterdam. I went to Bexhill Museum and learnt some amazing information about the collection and things like a prehistoric forest being part of the silt that makes up the sediment of the area. I went around the town in the more kind of non-spaces and commercial areas, to a lot of the charity shops, which are really good, and then to the brickworks, and to look at the fault lines that the brickworks exposes and the kind of aggregates they used within that, and the kind of churning of those materials within the factory of the brickworks itself as well. And a lot of local people work at the brickworks, and some of them are like fossil collectors and things, and have this kind of these strange collections. So there started being weird connections between, you know, Bexhill Museum and the brickworks, is both having lots of fossils that they were showing me.
But your interest in fossils is something that you've also brought from your wider practice, or was this an opportunity to delve further into that kind of particular area of interest?
Yeah, I guess so. It kind of came up naturally from being shown them. They seem to be popping up everywhere in Bexhill. You know, that it was all over. And I think I've been interested in fossils before, as a means to kind of, you know, think about something old and new, or flattened down and then pulled back up again, and that kind of, you know, agency of history or something, and also a kind of way of thinking about casting and making as well. So those things have been of interest to me in the past, but it feels kind of a different way of thinking about it now, because these fossils were kind of just a catalyst for talking about other ideas and materials and people, and understanding that in the context of Bexhill and for the England's Creative Coast Commission as well.
And do you think it's taken your work in a new direction? I think you know, the work I'd seen by you previously has always seemed something that you've challenged yourself to explore new ways of using materials, but there's also a consistency there, but that you've always had an interest in looking at what's hidden and what's not apparent. So kind of looking on the inside of things, bringing those insides out, considering the edges of things but in an abstract way. would you say that this commission, this project on the seaside, has allowed you to push further into that way of working, or?
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe visually this work has some similarities to another public artwork I've done, but it feels very different in the detail of it. And I don't know if I said a minute ago, but it's like really emerged from the materials it's made from in a completely different way to any of my works before. Like, so the work is made from bricks and metal and sandbags and cast elements, and they're all based on really specific parts of that location as well. Like the bricks are from the brickworks, the sand is the aggregate that can then that is the same way you'd make up a flood defense, and the cast is a similar thing to tetrapod casts, which are also used further down the coast as well. And the metalwork is kind of like thin sheet metal, where the canvas is boating canvas. You know, there's things that like it feels like almost it's become this kind of bore sample of things, but the fact that it's I'm saying, and I hope it looks like a worm in a way as well, is quite literal, and I hope kind of creates another kind of atmosphere of something that is more related to it being something that's like a story or a can create kind of other conversations, or maybe kind of go into the realm of like, you know, sci-fi or something as well. It's kind of monstrous and it's quite literal in that sense, but it takes on this kind of specific form or specific character, and that feels quite different from my other works before, like you mentioned, to be more abstract.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's something that's going to have a personality or a persona or something, and it's going to be a work that you see in different parts of the landscape. But there's we haven't talked about the exhibition that will be of additional work inside the Dillon Warr Pavilion, which is very much related to the work on the outside. How have you been thinking about that?
Yeah, so they kind of are entirely connected and in my head, part of the same work, and emerged from this thinking as well about quite a literal inside and outside, and kind of treating the building as something that very much connects to the public artwork. And I think I mentioned earlier about the Delaware being this kind of building that kind of takes a battering on the coast, but is also this kind of icon of that part of the country and the area as well, and a real kind of, you know, community hub that's important for a lot of people. But it was one of the first modernist public buildings in the UK that uses welded steel framing, and I quite like I'll explain a little bit more, but I think I quite like that idea of it being like, you know, it's a skeleton, it's like a metal skeleton, and the title of the Waterfronts work for England's Creative Coast is Invertebrate, which means an animal without a backbone or without a skeleton as well. So it's kind of like, you know, they're literally interconnected through the kind of form of their making, or their the flesh and the bones in some way. Yeah, so the outdoor artwork has kind of no, sorry, the indoor show is almost a kind of trail that the outdoor artwork has left. So it's kind of chomped through the building. It's kind of made the building become holy and porous in a sense. And so when you're outside the Delaware, you'll see holes in the gallery space that kind of relate to the artwork that you might wonder how or why, but I've kind of been thinking as the building is a type of kind of body or form that the worm sculpture has eaten through in a very literal sense, and so there's kind of a kind of breakdown or a kind of an architecture going on inside that has kind of been swallowed by something.
And there's something kind of, as you say, monstrous, scary, kind of sci-fi, and quite serious about all of that. But I always get a sense that humour is a really important aspect of your work.
I mean, it's a big worm outside of it as well. I think there's definitely an element of humour in it as well. And I don't know, that sometimes it's like watching a horror film that is like, sometimes when it's at its most scary or monstrous, it's also kind of funny as well, like especially when you see it, when it emerges, when you're seeing the thing in the flesh, it's not scary anymore, it's like the unknown. And I think maybe those two elements kind of happen here, where there's, if you go in from one side of the building, you'll see the internal show before the outside sculpture, and so there's, you wonder why things have been chewed, and there's kind of, you know, works that almost look like they're broken down or building up, or kind of trying to kind of half holding themselves up, but then you kind of see, you look out the holes in that inside space, and kind of the outside work emerges, and you kind of hopefully would make the connection between something that's done that as well. And yeah, I think the humor comes from a kind of cartoony humor where it's almost exaggerated in a way, like, you know, specific gestures or movements or colors or lines are exaggerated. And for me, that's a way to try and kind of create movement or liveliness through materials as well, and through kind of interaction with the stuff that I put out there.
Yeah, no, when you say cartoony, I was definitely thinking about the humour being manifested through this comical sort of, sometimes through a quite graphic-y, drawing-based ideas of things that we, you know, like bones and things that we might recognise through cartoons or something. But also playing with materials and colour and scale, all of those. I just think the way that you managed to manipulate all those different things is really important to your whole practice, to give that sense of the seriousness, but humour, but a dark humour, I guess. Just without us realising how you're doing it.
Yeah, I think that just that comes, I mean, just I make quite sometimes I make to quite a large scale, and I think that also brings a humor with it, where I'm like wobbling around the studio with something right above my head, trying to kind of grapple with that as well. And
you have got a pair of giant feet on the wall behind you, which I can't.
Oh, can you see them?
We're not supposed to see those.
No, I'll move my head. Yeah, I think there's humor in that kind of idea of maybe grotesque or comical, or like kind of, you know, body horror. Worms relate to that as well, the kind of horror or fascination of something like that, like seeing your big toe up close. You're like, what? This is really strange and ugly and alien, but also like attached to me and normal as well. Wow. That's just an example because there's a big foot behind me, but like that kind of thing too.
Yeah, but combining those different scales all the time, you're always kind of playing with that idea of whether something's large or small because it's far away, or it's really tiny and here it is next to something enormous. I know that always seems to be something that you're exploring and playing with. I think is, you know, there's a playfulness that seems really important to your work too.
Yeah, I think the detail is important. I think maybe from if you take a step back from the work, sometimes they look like quite serious sculpture, whatever that is, because they're made in the kind of, you know, I think about it in the context of every other sculpture that's been made, but then also maybe those details can kind of undo that, or prod or poke at that kind of as well, to try and think about what that means now, or what it can be now, or like if a detail can can change that into something else entirely, like maybe how a small kind of gesture can change your kind of interpretation of it. And I think for me that's always really important to try and like I'm always trying to kind of undo it or redo it or think about it in these ways where you know, it's like when an object, when you get used to something being around you, and then you really look at it closely and you're like, wow, that's made me think about it in totally different. I always use the example, because it's a really good example of rawhide dog chew bones, because they're like, you think about them as something that's like, you know, a dog chews like everywhere, but then you look at it and it's made from like wetted skin that's been pressed into a mold and then made into that shape. And it's weird, like why do we give our pets a shape of something, you know? And maybe like there's obviously reasons, but it's like the same thing as this kind of cartoonification. It's like a reinterpretation of it and a cycling of materials and stuff to that kind of, it makes me change my approach to it, like thinking of a bone as actually skin or something, and not a bone at all.
Yeah, I guess that's what I meant, or what I think I mean when I see your work, and it has this apparently humorous aspect to it, but there's clearly something really quite dark going on underneath there, and it's to do with our perception of what different things mean. You know, the bone shape, the kind of classic bone shape, when we're giving our dog something that's made of something else, it has to be in that shape, otherwise it wouldn't work. So you kind of wonder how many other things we have to have in place, how we have to construct our world in order for it to make sense. And you're all kind of picking away at that, right?
I hope so.
What's the exhibition inside? Is it going to be made of new works or existing works? And is the title of that exhibition also related to the one outside?
The title of the show inside is called Indifferent Deep. So I was kind of thinking about it as a space, and as a space that's like kind of beyond awe, but at the same time very familiar. And so I think it relates because it's kind of it's the product of the outdoor work, but I'm not sure if the titles would feel like, to somebody visiting, I'm not sure if there's any direct relation. And the show inside will be made from this has changed quite a lot recently, but there's a lot of MDF sheeting which kind of makes up the kind of body of the space, which was given to me by a local builder whose project was cancelled because of COVID, and so they were left with all this stuff that they had to shift. And I thought about it, and it also, MDF is something that's like this kind of horrible and kind of amazing material that is like a product of the building industry and all the kind of problems of that, the consumption of that, but it's also wood that's been chewed up and spat back out in the same way and flattened and made rational. And I've got all these pictures on my studio wall of the bricks from the brickworks that as they're in the kiln that look like kind of pixels or something. Once they've been fired, they have these kind of fire patterns on them, and the bricks then become a pixel. And I started thinking about the MDF as something similar, as something that's like, you know, it's like us trying to make sense of material, or like squashing it literally into logic to then build with again. And these two really counter, like the two sides of the thing is something that's really destructive of like using stuff to make stuff to use up resources, but then also the fact that like bricks and MDF sheeting is used to build houses for people to live in as well. And
Mm.
obviously people are trying to find other approaches to that, but those are the cheapest ways of building, and they're the things that are kind of produced and overproduced. And how I had been seeing the kind of land kind of dug out and used to present. So the MDF, suddenly this kind of weird situation emerged where it made sense in relation to everything else, in relation to the worm and the context of Bexhill and the brickworks and a lot of my thinking. So that's a long way of saying the inside show is a kind of a cannibalization of the existing gallery space, where there's been holes chomped through walls, and the MDF flooring kind of acts as a kind of grid in that as well, which reveals kind of aggregates and materials that I've collected, and then there's a few works displayed within there as well that kind of look a bit like defunct machinery or body parts that have kind of stopped working or are trying to start working again, but are in the kind of loops. There's a lot of loops, and there's a lot of drippy pipes and plumbing, and cuts and cross sections and slices and things. I'm still making it, so that's what I can say at the moment.
So someone watching this film may have already been to see the exhibition, and they'll be looking at you thinking about how you're going to finish it off.
If you don't see those things, then I've obviously hit some problems along the way.
But it does sound like an amazing combination of materials and sculpture, and all kind of in an installation that takes up the whole space in a way. I mean, you're using your sculpture to really take over the gallery, the outside and the inside, in a way that kind of transforms it, would you say?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think I was thinking about this today because the holes are starting to appear in the gallery, and you can see the sea from outside, and water is such an important part of all my thinking within this, but is everything within the show and within the work outside the gallery is very dry, is very like is kind of all the kind of dry materials in a way, but water seems to run through it as a kind of idea. And I don't know, I think the sea is this kind of you think about it in terms of like civic plumbing and the sea, and somewhere in between that are these things that I've been thinking about, but everything is kind of responding to water. Like the work Invertebrate is made from flood defences, and a lot of the things I'm doing now are I'm doing things with rusted metal and things about flooded engines and things that where water stops things working as well. So there's something about movement in there, and the same with sand. Sand is a really big part of the public artwork and how it's filled with sand, and inside sand makes up a lot of the works. And I think sand is this material that's like the product of being eroded, and also something that you use to erode materials and break down. So there's these things that I've been thinking about that also are things that kind of are ubiquitous. They get everywhere, and so somehow I've tried to do that with the way I'm dealing with the space as well. There's a few works inside and there's the work outside, but they kind of interlace and kind of overlap and imply bigger systems of things.
Well, particularly, I imagine, being on the edge of on this coastline, on this border, the urgent kind of pressing situation of climate change that's happening, and you're talking about transformation of materials but erosion, and all of those things must have been in the back of your mind when you were thinking about both the outside sculpture and the exhibition inside. And certainly that's something that's one of the key areas to think about in terms of all of this whole project for England's Creative Coast and the Waterfronts Commissions. The idea of what the most pressing and urgent things to think about are that are affecting the coastline, but also these particular places on the coastline, and in this case, Bexhill, of course.
Yeah, totally. And it's something I think about all the time, like making stuff, you're putting new things out there, you're using stuff anyway, and like so it's this constant kind of, a lot of the time, problem solving to think what's the best way of approaching this, or should I be doing it, should I be using this, how do I use this, and all those questions that I think if you make stuff you think about all the time. But yeah, on the coast sometimes you can see a big yellow band of fog that is pollution, and so it's like literal as well. There's this like sublime seascape, and then sometimes like a yellow band of fog, and it's nowhere more, there's no more, like it really hit me when I saw that. I was like, Jesus, like that's like a tangible thing, and it shouldn't just be because I can see it, it's a problem, because it's not. I think about it a lot, but when you see it like that, it's a kind of different experience.
Yeah. So certainly those, the way that you've thought about making all of those works stem from thinking about those issues, the pollution, the reconstruction of things using other things, and what's happening to this particular part of the country. Seems to be a very implicit part of the work.
For sure, and a large part of Invertebrate is made of sand, which can be emptied out and put back again, and that's what I was kind of saying about problem solving things. It's made of fabric and sand, which can then be back or be used elsewhere. And the same with the MDF cladding, it was given to me from somebody who couldn't use it, and then after that it will have an onward life, and I think hopefully go to make some local spaces somewhere, some maybe studios or something. So there's this kind of cycle of stuff as well where I hope it can be a part of, but not like the end of.
Yeah, it's a sort of transient thing that becomes something else later, maybe. Yeah. And would you say that or anything else is the most important aspect of this project for you?
I think that in terms of what it can, those material sensitivities are a really big part of it, and being a direct response to the environment, like literally in some ways, and that kind of dialogue with the building and stories, and how that can hopefully open up other things too. But I think I mean, since we started speaking and the projects emerged, like there's been COVID, there's been Brexit's happened, and like it's this like gigantic upheaval, and like kind of the world has changed really, and it's kind of I think for me it's weird that I think in a lot of other senses I would have entirely changed what I felt I could possibly do because of that, but in a way I worry about this idea of the worm and these materials being a bit like too close to it all because of the idea. But I think it felt important for me to kind of still tackle it head on, because it was obviously there before as well. Like we were still aware of the government shutting people out and the risk of infection and contamination in the things we use and stuff, and now it just feels really 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 confrontational about that, but it's been interesting kind of thinking about this work throughout that.
No, it is amazing that when we first started discussing this project we had no idea that this amazing hiatus was going to happen. A whole year would suddenly kind of intervene in the whole project because of COVID, and that by the time we would be launching the projects, that the relationship between the UK and Europe would have changed, and we're all thinking about things in a different way. And at the same time, you know, because of what's happened in the US, particularly politically, with Black Lives Matter movement and racial and social justice suddenly being something we're all thinking about much more, and educating ourselves around. Thinking about public spaces and what public monuments and public sculpture and those kinds of things mean. Somehow your work stands as a way of as being a monument to a worm, maybe, or at least being in a public space that's safer than many other places, or that people can think of as being safe. So the idea of what happens in public spaces and who controls them feels like something that's being reevaluated, and that process has been going on as this project's developed. Is that something that's important to you?
Of course. I mean, I don't. I would never say that this sculpture can represent those problems that we're only as a society we're only beginning to tackle, and we've got such a long way to go with it. But I don't know, worms sink rocks, so why can't they sink monuments? I think it's a nice way to think about it. Brilliant.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been really good to revisit this project with you. Now we're at this point of finally having it installed and ready for other people to see.